Chapter 4 Finding Jim. The sun was so high in the sky when I woke up that I figured it was after 8 o'clock. I lay there on the grass in the cool shade, looking up at the sun through the holes in the branches. I felt rested and satisfied. A couple of squirrels sat on a limb and jabbered at me in a friendly way. I was lazy and comfortable and didn't even want to get up to cook breakfast. So I started dozing off again, when suddenly I heard a deep booming sound. It came from way up the river. I sat up and rested on my elbow, listening. Pretty soon I heard it again. I jumped up and ran down to the river. A ferry boat full of people was heading towards the island. Suddenly, I knew what was happening. They were firing a cannon over the water because they believed it would make a drowned body come to the top. And they were searching for a mine. I stood hidden in the bushes, watching the cannon smoke and listening to the booms. I lit a pipe and had a good long smoke while I went on watching. By and by, the boat was drifted so close to the shore that I could have almost touched it. I saw most everybody on the boat. Pap and Judge Thatcher, Joe Harper and Tom Sawyer, and plenty more. I'd hear them all talking about a murder. My murder. Suddenly the captain called out, "Look sharp now. The current sets in the closest here, and maybe he's washed ashore and got tangled amongst the brush at the water's edge." I hope so, anyway. I didn't hope so. Everybody crowded up and leaned over the rails, nearly in my face. They kept still, watching with all their might. When they didn't find anything, they gave up and headed back toward town. I knew I was all right now. Nobody else would come hunting for me. I got my traps out of the canoe and made a nice camp in the thick woods. I set up a tent out of my blankets so I'd have a place to put my things where the rain couldn't get at them. Then I caught a catfish and roasted over a fire. When it was dark, I sat by my campfire, smoking and feeling pretty well satisfied. After a while, it got sort of lonesome, so I listened to the current swash along and counted the stars until I fell asleep. And so it was for 3 days and nights. No difference, just the same thing. But on the fourth day, I went exploring around the island. My island. I was boss of it. It all belonged to me, so to say, and I wanted to know all about it. I was walking along when all of a sudden in a clearing I bounded right into the ashes of a campfire. They were still warm. My heart jumped up into my lungs. I never waited to look further, but uncocked my gun and went sneaking back into my camp as quiet as fast as I could. Every now and then I stopped for a second amongst the thick leaves and listened again. As soon as I got back to my camp, I put out the fire, hid my traps, and climbed up in a tree. I reckon I was up in the tree 2 hours, but I didn't see or hear a thing. Well, I couldn't stay up there forever, so at last I climbed down. By that time, it was dark, and I was pretty hungry. But I didn't dare make a fire, so I went to sleep hungry. I didn't sleep much. I couldn't, somehow, because I was thinking all the time. By and by, I said to myself, I can't live this way. I'm gonna go find out who's here on the island with me. I'll find out or burst. So I began searching all around the island, and after a while, I caught a glimpse of a fire through the trees. I went toward it, slowly and cautiously. Soon I was close enough to have a look, and there, on the ground, lay a man. He had a blanket over most of his body, and his head was nearly in the fire. Pretty soon he yawned and stretched, then he threw off the blanket. It was Jim, Miss Watson's slave. At that time in Missouri, it was still legal to have slaves, and Jim and I had gotten to be friends when I had lived at the widow's. I sure was glad to see him. "Hello, Jim," I said, skipping out of the bushes. He jumped up and stared at me with a wild look. Then he dropped down on his knees and gasped, "Don't hurt me, don't! I never heard of ghosts. I always like dead people. You go back to the river where you belong." Well, it took some talking, but I finally made him understand that I wasn't dead. I was ever so glad to see Jim. I wasn't lonesome now. I talked on and on, telling Jim everything that had happened to me, but Jim only sat there looking at me and never saying one word. Finally, we went over to where the canoe was tied up, and while Jim built fire in a grassy open place among the trees, I fetched some meal, bacon, coffee, and sugar from the boat. We cooked breakfast, and when it was ready, we lolled on the grass and ate it. Jim laid into it with all his might, for he was almost starved. Then, when he had gotten pretty well stuffed, he relaxed and said, "Listen here, Huck. I gotta tell you why I'm here, but you must never tell a soul." After I promised, Jim told me his story. "Well, Huck, I had to run off," he said. "Miss Watson, she picked on me all the time and treated me poorly, but she always said she wouldn't sell me down to the New Orleans. but I noticed there was a slave trader around the place a lot, and I began to get uneasy. Well, one night I crept home late, and I heard Miss Watson tell the widow that she was going to sell me down to New Orleans for $800. It was so much money. She just couldn't resist. The widow tried to talk her out of it, but I got so scared, I never waited to hear the rest. I lit up my mighty quick, I tell you. So for the past week, Jim was in hiding too. We both agreed that it was good to have company, and we set about fishing for our lunch.